I think that it's high time that Israel and the United States, or Israel alone or the United States alone, take the action that's required in order to rid the earth, quite frankly, of this Iranian menace. I'm not particularly interested in deadlines. I'm not particularly interested in how many light weapons or heavy weapons Hamas has. The goal ought to be the complete destruction of Hamas as the terror entity that it currently is. She essentially defined Israel as the common enemy to all. Now, this is an individual who denied that our people were raped on October 7th. She's also an individual who's run cover for Hamas. We're all in this fight together, and it's high time the Haredi community acted as though it understood that. So turning firstly to the subject of Iran, in his most recent speech on the subject, Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed that our position here in Israel is that all enriched materials have to leave Iran. Now, that's just one of the conditions that Israel is seeking to have imposed on the Iranians by the Americans during these negotiations. The additional conditions include a severe curbing of their ballistic missile weapons program, an end to their nuclear weapons program, most importantly of all, and also a severe curbing and dismantling of their terror proxy network that's arrayed around the Middle East and far, far beyond. The issue that's at hand is that there is nothing to imply that the Iranians have yet received the memo that I would argue was very clearly transmitted to them during the course of the 12-day war, namely that Israel is prepared to act in the defense of its critical, vital national interests and to operate, including kinetically, against threats that it sees emanating from Tehran. And in addition to that, the Iranians should also have understood very, very clearly that the Americans are prepared to join forces in order to do the very same. But the Iranians seem poised to continue to drag out these negotiations. Special envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are both here in the area today in order to continue with those negotiations with Arakchi, the foreign minister of Iran. And I personally believe that the time for negotiations has long since passed. I think that it's high time that Israel and the United States, or Israel alone or the United States alone, take the action that's required in order to rid the earth, quite frankly, of this Iranian menace. It's been there since the revolution. It's continued to grow. It's shown no sign whatsoever of moderating at all. And all of these negotiations are, of course, taking place against the backdrop of a very credible military threat, including the mooted arrival in the coming days of the USS Ford aircraft carrier, which is the largest aircraft carrier that the United States has at its disposal, that is chugging its way over toward the region as we speak. So, in my view, time for negotiations, as I've said, is well behind us. The time for action is now. The president said that the time for action was upon us. And Lindsey Graham, senator from the United States, is currently in Israel, and he gave a briefing to the Israeli media from his hotel here in Jerusalem, and he actually expressed that, in his opinion, the strike against Iran is likely to take place within the coming weeks rather than the coming months. So not immediate, perhaps, in the senator's assessment or in his declared assessment, but on the way nonetheless. I believe it's necessary. I believe it's required. And I think unless the Iranians bring a very real concession to the negotiating table, we're likely to see President Trump act on what he said he was poised to do. But I do also think people should keep in mind that the president does seem ready to strike a deal with the Iranians in the event that such a concession or a parcel of concessions is forthcoming. So I'm not really able to offer a prediction, more of an assessment about where things are at this time. And overarchingly, I would just say everybody should closely watch this space. So turning now to the issue of the Gaza Strip, there's been a 60-day deadline that's been put forward for Hamas to disarm itself of its small weapons and small arms. And these arms include AK-47s. Now, one of the things that I want everybody to understand is you can call these arms whatever you like. You can call them light arms, you can call them heavy arms, you can call them machine guns, you can call them automatic rifles, whatever you want to call them. is your business. What I call them is weapons of war that are being toted by terrorists who are sworn to the destruction and the murder, not only of the State of Israel, but of Jews everywhere that they can and may be found. And for that reason, I'm not particularly interested in deadlines. I'm not particularly interested in how many light weapons or heavy weapons Hamas has. The goal, in my view, should not be to disarm Hamas or declare an armistice during the course of which Hamas can turn in its weapons. The goal ought to be the complete destruction of Hamas as the terror entity that it currently is. There are a few reasons for that needing to be the goal. Number one, that was what was declared to be one of the two war aims at the beginning of this dreadful conflict that was foisted upon us by Hamas, namely ensuring that Hamas was toppled and could never constitute a threat to Israel again. That goal has not yet been realized. It needs to be pursued until its end and its realization. Number two, the anti-Semitism that engulfed diaspora communities throughout the world was a direct result and consequence of the fact that Israel found itself reeling against the ropes of the heptagonal-shaped ring that it was fighting in the immediate aftermath of the October 7th attack. And so anti-Semites overseas reasoned to themselves that if the Jewish state was perhaps there for the taking, so too might be Jewish communities wherever they may be residing. And if we want to salvage some sort of normality when it comes to the day-to-day existence of the diaspora Jewish communities, we need to make the haters of the Jewish people recognize and understand that Israel, the one and only Jewish state, is a solid and sure and secure thing. And therefore, the would-be victims of those who hate the Jewish people, namely diaspora Jewish communities, are not as homeless and not as placeless as anti-Semites like their Jewish victims to be. Hence, we need to prop up and ensure the long-term security of the State of Israel. And you don't do that by leaving a terror organization in situ in the very land, in the very area from which it launched the dreadful attack against us. And the third reason that we should be demolishing and destroying Hamas is that we've just seen and looked on during the course of the Munich Security Conference, where successive European governments spoke about the need to arm up and be ready to defend themselves. Keir Starmer, the non-prime minister of once Great Britain, for example, expressed that very theme, that against a perceived, possible, potential threat somewhere in the future, Great Britain and other European countries may actually have to do that thing that they've forgotten how to do, namely defend and protect themselves. Now, all of those speeches by the French, by the Brits, and by other European powers were for a scenario which has not yet come to pass. And yet it's deemed perfectly legitimate that they ready themselves to ensure their own security. Here in Israel, the horrors have already been wrought against us. They've already been wielded against us, and they are ongoing and they are enduring. And therefore, if it's good enough for the Europeans to say that they must ready themselves to vanquish enemies that come towards them, then yes, it's absolutely good enough for Israel to do the very same. And I think we need to dispense with all of this nonsense about whether or not light arms should be taken or Hamas should be allowed to make its way out of the Gaza Strip or clemency should be given to some of these Hamas terrorists. No, they should be destroyed. The organization should be destroyed. And quite frankly, I just hope that I'm getting my points across. I'm not a fan of their existence. I'm a great fan of their complete and total elimination, in part because it's very, very doable. In terms of the fighting that's going on inside the Gaza Strip, it's very clear that the IDF continues to operate in alignment with the new mindset of the Israeli defense establishment, namely that we will not allow terror threats to build up and to ensconce themselves proximate to our forces, proximate to our borders, or proximate to our population centers. It's appropriate that we operate in that way, but I believe that it's yet insufficient because it is responsive and it is reactive. We need to be proactive. We need to draw together all of the necessary plans that are required in order to launch a successful operation for the complete dismantling of Hamas, something that my sources tell me is currently underway. within the senior ranks of the general staff here and the military planners in Israel. And then we actually need to pull the trigger on that. And regardless of any and all of the work of the Board of Peace, which seems to bring 8,000 Indonesian soldiers to come and somehow police Hamas, regardless of any of those efforts that are underway, people need to be very clear-eyed about the truth. The truth is nobody is going to fight Hamas other than the Israel Defense Forces. The Israel Defense Forces themselves were for many years far too reluctant to take the fight to this terror army, which is one of the reasons that we saw that terror army build itself up to such a dangerous entity that burst through the borders on October the 7th. If Israel itself was deterred by Hamas in Gaza, which I'm ashamed to say we were for far too long, does anybody really expect that the Indonesians are going to take the fight to the Gazas, or the Emiratis, or the Turks, or anybody else? Of course they won't. And so I think that more swiftly that Israel can deploy forward the forces that are needed to bring about the demise of Hamas, the better everybody here in Israel will be. So it's good that we're reacting. It's good that we're doing so in a very determined manner. But I want to see something far more proactive take place. And by the way, on the issue of Gaza, I just want to warn everybody, there's a lot of talk among the chattering classes about the idea that if America can draw together an investing coalition of the willing to somehow rebuild the Gaza Strip within the Yellow Line, namely in the area that is under Israeli control, that somehow Gazans living beyond the Yellow Line would look upon the gleaming image coming out of Gaza within the Yellow Line and suddenly decide that they are going to cast aside their enmity and hatred towards Israel and the Jewish people, knowing that a greater and better life awaits them if they can just cross into Gaza within the Yellow Line. And the analogy that's often used is that this is what East Germany thought about West Germany before the toppling of the Berlin Wall. I believe it was in 1989. This analogy is beyond ridiculous and absurd. Why? Because if the Gazans wanted to look upon a shining city on the hill, very proximate indeed to where they were living, they ought to have looked no further than toward the state of Israel, which was very, very close to them indeed. What Israel represented is what they could have had if they had entered into some sort of functioning relationship with Israel after Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005. They don't want that. They've never wanted that. They are ruled by regimes for which they have voted, who have never, ever spoken about any coexistence with Israel whatsoever. All of these analogies about the Berlin Wall and dividing Gaza into a successful Gaza versus a non-successful Gaza, it's all complete nonsense. Everybody should listen to the words of Gaza's leadership, not to the aspirations, illusions, and pipe dreams of policy analysts who live very, very far away indeed from where this conflict is actually taking place. So there's a firestorm that I want to touch upon that surrounds Rapporteur Francesca Albanese of the United Nations, who actually sat on a panel that featured her and Khalid Mashal of Hamas and the foreign minister of Iran. A panel, by the way, that was sponsored by Al Jazeera, the great Qatari outlet, I think not. And on that panel, she essentially defined Israel as the common enemy to all. Now, this is an individual who denied that our people were raped on October the 7th. She's also an individual who's run cover for Hamas, expressing that when they call for the death of all Jews, they don't actually mean all Jews. I wonder if she'd be willing to dress herself up as a member of the ultra-Orthodox and go for a walk inside Gaza, specifically the area beyond the Yellow Line that's currently under the control of Hamas, if she's so very sure of Jewish security there. Look, nobody should be surprised at all about what this woman is saying. She has a long history of antipathy towards Israel and the Jewish community. And one needs to consider that when the French are condemning the words of the rapporteur of the United Nations. Something egregious must truly have happened. The idea that the French would be out front and center saying that what she has said is anti-Semitic really tells you everything that you need to know. But as though one would need any more evidence, consider the fact that 100 members of the arts and film industry have come forward in support of Albanese, putting their pens to paper and saying that they support everything that she does and all that she stands for. You know, I'm not somebody who's a big fan of the impending AI revolution, but if there is something that I think would be a silver lining to that development, it would be that hopefully, with enough time, the AI revolution might render obsolete these horrendously foolish, half-witted actors and musicians, including those who've written this letter, which is basically a collective of has-beens and never-weres, so that we never have to suffer them treading into and launching into diatribes against the Jewish people and against the state of Israel and in favor of terror organizations ever again. So I find myself in the odd position of cheering on that AI revolution, and I do hope that these actors will frankly be swiftly banished from the public conversation. Nobody should take any interest in what these people have to say. Turning now to what took place in Bnei Brak, without descending too much into the details, 2 female soldiers of the IDF had to be evacuated from this ultra-Orthodox neighborhood in the face of massive, growing, and I would say near violent riots against the fact that they were there in the area. They mistakenly believing that these 2 female soldiers were trying to draft or to deliver draft notices for ultra-Orthodox civilians that they wanted to come and serve in the Israel Defense Forces. Now, look, this speaks to a major problem that either this government or the next government urgently has to get a grip of. For many years, there was an idea in the State of Israel that the Haredi community might not have to draft into the military, but they would at the very least have to become part of the labor force. They would at the very least have to enfranchise within Israeli society, and they would at the very least have to take their due and appropriate portion in terms of national service, whether that be as ambulance drivers, whether it be as EMTs, whether it be as comforters and carers of Holocaust survivors, lay teachers. The tasks that are available for people through national service here really are endless. For many years, most Israelis would have accepted that type of compromise. But I think post-October the 7th, Israelis now require that members of the Haredi community not only are enfranchised within the labor force, but also, on top of that, are drafted into service in the Israel Defense Forces, with some exceptions being carved out for exceptional students. If they're luminaries in the biblical texts, for example, they might be given an exemption. And also for those who want to give their service by way of national non-military service, but national service nonetheless. If this problem isn't taken in hand by this government or by the next government, I think that we are going to see very real, serious discord in Israel, within our borders, Jew against Jew, a notion and a prospect that absolutely horrifies me. And as much as I've said that it's upon the government to take this matter in hand, it is absolutely incumbent upon the leadership of the Haredi ultra-Orthodox community to understand what their Jewish brethren and their Jewish sisters have been through post-October the 7th and urge the younger members of fighting and service age within their community to now put on a uniform and face down the enemies that come for all of us. And I can assure you, those enemies would make no distinction between the Haredi and the non-Haredi Israeli community. We're all in this fight together, and it's high time that the Haredi community acted as though it understood that. Hi folks, thank you very much for watching this episode of the Situational Briefing. If you're enjoying this content, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button so that you get all of our reports as soon as they are published. And remember, I very much want to know what's on your minds, so please be sure to leave your comments and your questions in the comments section below, and I'll see you next time.